Hi guys, very welcome to Mentour and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. So in this little bonus episode, I'm going to continuing what I was started to talk about in my last video, which is engine failures in cruise. So in my last episode, which I'll be linking to up here, I talked about how do we deal with it. If an engine suddenly fails when we're up at flight level 390, what does the pilot flying actually do? How does it deal with it? But I didn't talk about the next part, what happens after we've secured the aircraft. That's what I'll be talking about today. Stay tuned.
131016, everyone right, right on. Third line, 31 right. Delta 260, fields are due.
So guys, before I start this video, I just want to make sure that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've hit the notification bell. Now that's very important because sometimes I do these bonus episodes and I might be doing things like live streams or special occasions. And if you haven't put the notification bell active, then you might not be notified about that. So make sure that you have done that before you continue now. Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about initially what will happen when an engine fails suddenly. We're sitting up there in cruise, looking outside, watching the beautiful views, and then all of a sudden, an engine fails. Now, I mentioned that we need to put rudder in to make sure that the aircraft doesn't go into a sudden snap and spin. We need to get the altitude on our mode control panel down. We need to set the correct speed and max continuous thrust on the remaining engine. All of that is to make sure that the aircraft keeps flying and doesn't stall. Okay, so now once the pilot flying has done that, we are going to be in a controlled descent down to an altitude below our single engine service ceiling, below the altitude where the aircraft can actually maintain the altitude on the one remaining engine. Right, so that's all good, but we still haven't gotten far in our planning. There's still a lot of work to do. So initially, these whole things have to be done immediately. But after that, we also have to secure the engine. We have to find out what's actually wrong. What happened to the engine? Is there any checklist that we need to do? So once the pilot flying has the aircraft under control and in a controlled descent, he or she is going to ask the pilot monitoring, the non-flying pilot, to state the malfunction. So what will happen then is that the pilot monitoring will start looking at all of the available data. Did we hear a bang? Did we feel any vibration? Do we smell anything? And start looking at the engine instrumentations from the top to the bottom. Start looking at, for example, the N1. All right, the N1 is the speed of the fan. If the N1 is still rotating, that's good, right? It means that there's probably nothing wrong with the fan. If the N1 is 0, that means that the fan has seized up and that has transferred an enormous amount of energy into the rest of the engine. There might also be fan blades missing, and that's going to show up as huge vibrations in the engine. Now, these kind of things, if that was happening, a fan blade missing or an engine seizure, that would be a severe damage, and that needs to be followed up with something called memory items, which I'll get to in a second. But the pilot monitoring goes through all of the engine instrumentations, both the upper DU and the lower DU, looking for any exceedance or anything that looks weird. And they don't stop until we have come down to the fire panel, which is behind the throttle quadrant on the center of the cockpit. And there we're looking at, is there any engine fire indication? That will also have a fire bell and a red fire handle. Or an overheat indication. An overheat indication is just a temperature difference between a fire and an overheat. Okay? Once that's done, the pilot monitoring will come with a diagnosis saying that, okay, it looks like we have an engine failure, engine number 1 or 2. The pilot monitoring has now given the best thought, but there's still a possibility that they might have missed something. So the pilot flying, who has been concentrating on just flying the aircraft up until this point, is now looking down, give a quick glance and give, yes, I agree, or no, actually, have another look there, there's something strange. So there's always going to be a communication going before they decide on what to do. Now, if there's an engine failure, there are no memory items to be done. We just go straight to take up the quick reference handbook and do the checklist. If there's been some kind of severe damage, then there need to be memory items done. Memory items are things that needs to be done by memory in order to make sure that we secure the engine so it doesn't start or continue to feed, for example, fuel into a burning engine, things like that. Now, if you guys are interested in seeing how we actually do this, how we do the engine identification of the failure, how we do the shutdown and the memory, not the memory items, but the checklist, all of that is handled inside of the collection engine failures inside of the Mentour Aviation app.
Positive N1, engine failure indicator EDT, positive N2, no engine fire warning switch on or engine overheat light on. Seems to be just say engine failure, engine number 2.
So I'm hoping that you all have the Mentour Aviation app by now. If you don't, you have the free download links here. It's completely free to get it, and you can get the engine failure collection. Or better yet, you get the all-in-one collection. In that case, you'll get all of the collections in there. So there will be evacuations, there will be TCAS maneuvers, Cat 3 approaches, setups, engine failures, all of that will be inside of the all-in-one collection. So check that out. Anyway, so the checklist will now be up. So we've talked about Aviate, that is controlling the aircraft, getting it into control descent. Navigate is going to come next, and then communicate. So we're now descending. Now, if you're descending without a clearance, air traffic control needs to know about it. And we need to potentially turn. So at this point, the pilot monitoring, well actually, if the pilot monitoring is working a checklist, the pilot flying is going to take the radio. Pilot flying will call in and call a mayday call. Now an engine failure could be both a pan-pan call and a mayday call. But since we're descending without a clearance and we can't maintain our altitude, that would constitute a mayday call. So mayday, 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 Mentour 360, unable to maintain altitude due to an engine failure, descending flight level 250, would you like us to turn? The reason we're asking if air traffic control would like us to turn or not is because if we are on an airway, all the modern aircraft are flying on GPSs now, they're going to be bang onto the airway. So we might have traffic just bang below us. And if we're now descending without a clearance, we're now descending into and closing in on the people below us. So it's a good idea to start turning, maybe 45 degrees left or right. If we're on direct routing, that might not be necessary, but it's always a good idea to think about it, have a look at our TCAS display and see, do we see anyone below us? Anyway, so that's the mayday call coming in. Now we're descending. The pilot monitoring is doing whatever checklist that we have deemed is necessary, and we have called air traffic control. Now we need to try to figure out what to do next, okay? Now we are bombarded with loads of information at this point, and we need to find a model on how to do proper decision making. All different airlines have different acronyms to help them to do this, but in my airline we use an acronym called PIOC. So that's the air crew figure out, first of all, what is the problem? Okay, what is the actual problem right now? Then, information. What information can we gather? That means both from our engine instrumentation, might be from air traffic control, it might be from our cabin crew. So that we'll get to in a second. Options. What options do we have? In case of an engine failure, if there's no indication of any damage to the engine, that means that it's probably flamed out maybe because of fuel contamination or icing or really heavy precipitation. Well, in that case, can we restart it maybe? There's a separate checklist for that. Options, select. What do we select? In this case, we'll probably try to restart the engines. So execute what we've selected, and then after it, evaluate. So let's say that we try to restart the engine then. Pilot monitoring will be directed by the quick reference handbook checklist to try to restart the engines if there's no indications of severe damage. We will start doing that. There's a specific procedure for doing that. You have to think a little bit before doing it. And if you want to see how it's done, once again, engine failure collection inside of the app. And in this case, let's say it doesn't work. Now, once that's done, either even before we start to restart the engine or after we've tried to restart the engine, it's probably a good idea to get some information from the cabin crew. So the captain will then generally do this. If the captain was pilot flying, he or she will hand over the controls to the first officer. We will ding the cabin crew and then take up the PA mic and say number 1 to the flight deck. Now that's a very powerful signal to the cabin crew. They will know exactly when they hear number 1 to the flight deck that something is not right, and they are expecting to get something called a NITS briefing, which I'll get to in a second. They will come up to the number 1, which is the purser, the cabin chief, will take up the interphone and say number 1 standing by, and I will then tell them, well, listen, we have a little bit of a problem. Can you tell us if you have noticed something? I won't tell them exactly what the problem is because I don't want them to be biased, but I want to hear if they have maybe heard something strange, seen something, or maybe they've smelled something. Because all of that is going to be information for me to use for my problem solving later on and for my decision making. So they will tell me, well, no, we haven't noticed anything. Great. Okay, I will get back to you in a couple of minutes with a full NITS briefing. So I tend to take the information first, and depending on what they say, I'm now going to have to discuss that with my colleague, and then we'll take a decision that can base the briefing to the cabin crew on. So we get back in. We'll now have to look at what our options is. Now we didn't manage to restart the engine, so that's bad. We only have one engine. This means that we need to land at the closest suitable airport. And suitable airport is an airport that is long enough and maybe have the approach aids and weather good enough for us to land. If we have a choice, we will probably choose something that we know, that we are familiar with. If it's really urgent, then we will choose whatever airport is closest to us. When it comes to if we are, for example, out of the sea, my airline doesn't have ETOPS approval, which means that we're never further away from a shore than 1 hour single engine flying time. That's what we need to. We need to be within 1 hour single engine flying time from a suitable alternate. So we will head towards that alternate. Our range will be determined based on our fuel flow. So our FMC, the computer on board, it doesn't know that we're single engine. So all the fuel predictions that's given us is based on 2 engines, which is not right. And some of you have asked, well, doesn't it actually burn less fuel on 1 engine? No, that's not the way it works. The engine have to produce the same thrust, to keep the aircraft flying as 2 engines would be producing. But now you have a big thing that is causing drag, that is not producing anything, and also the aircraft is probably flying a little bit sideways because of the rudder being inputted, which also causes a lot of drag. So it actually uses more fuel with 1 engine than with 2 engines. So we will look at our fuel flow, say, right, it's burning this much per hour. Convert that into minutes, look at how much fuel we have, and then see, right, so this is the range we have. This is how much time we have before we run out of fuel. Then we can use that to see what is our ground speed, how far can we get. We also need to have a little bit of extra in case we need to do a go around or a diversion on top of that. But this is the actual range that we have. Now we're starting to get into why it's so important for you to be quick in your head when it comes to maths, and also why you have to understand physics. So Brilliant.org, which is our long-term sponsor, which I've linked to down here as well, they give you all the tools needed to improve that quick thinking, and also these kind of techniques on how to divide very complex problems into smaller pieces and then deal with that as a whole. So check them out. Anyway, so now we know our range, we have a plan, we know how long it's going to take us to get there. Right, so now it's time to talk to the cabin crew. Now they would have already been alerted because I've already given them some information, but they're still lacking the full NIT briefing. So I will ding them again. I'll take the PA Maya, I'm going to say number 1 to the flight deck. Number 1 will take up the interphone and say number 1 standing by, and I will tell them, this is a NITS briefing, please listen carefully. And then I will line up nature. The nature of the problem is we've had an engine failure on our right-hand engine. Intention is that we are going to divert to, for example, Lisbon. Time, it's going to take us about 35 minutes to get there. Special procedures, I need you to keep the cabin secure, and there is no need for an SOS demo. An SOS demo is a demo that I will tell the cabin crew to give the passengers in case I think there's a high likelihood of an evacuation happening on landing. So that will be, for example, for an in-flight fire, for an unsafe landing gear, off-field landing, like a ditching, for example, or something severe like that. But in case of an engine failure, there is no real need for that. It's going to be a normal landing, a little bit higher speed because it's going to be flaps 15, but apart from that, it's completely normal landing. The aircraft flies perfectly on one engine once it's down below its single engine service ceiling. Now, they need to then read that back to me. And why do they need to do that? Well, you probably had this problem with your spouse as well. You tell them something and then they just go away and they do something, come back, and it shows that it's, they didn't do what you wanted them to do. So you tell them, go get the kids, and 2 minutes later they come back with your keys. Okay? That wouldn't happen if they would have completed the feedback loop. So this is why every time that we communicate something important in the aviation world, be it to the cabin crew or to air traffic control, there's always a readback. So I would say, this is the NITS briefing. They will read back, okay, so the nature is an engine failure. Intention is to go to Lisbon. Time is about 35 minutes. And special procedures, I'll keep the cabin secure, and we will not do an SOS demo. Very important to get that feedback loop, because it is the way that communication works. All right, it's the way that the most effective communication works. You have a sender, you have a receiver, and then once the receiver has received the message, they will send it back to confirm that the information is correct. Okay, makes sense? Good. So now the cabin crew is aware of what's going to happen. They have a plan. They will talk amongst each other, and they will divide their resources. Now we need to speak to the passengers, and making a PA to the passengers is very important. It's always going to be the captain who does it in case there is some kind of problems, unless the captain is incapacitated, of course. But what we want to try to give to the passengers is the picture of someone who is in control, who is calm, and who has a plan. So I will give a nice, short, but slow PA, telling the passengers that we have a technical problem. We need our engineers to have a look at that. So we are diverting to Lisbon. We are going to be landing in about 35 minutes. And once we're on the ground, I am going to talk to the company to make sure that your ongoing travel is being seen to. Right? And at the very end, I will reinforce my authority to the cabin crew by telling them to please listen to the cabin crew's instruction. Now, this is all very important. The way that you do this, if you sound stressed and you sound like you haven't really thought through the PA, that's just going to stress the passengers more. But if you sound calm, collected, and with a plan, and especially projecting that you're already thinking about how they're going to get to their destination, well, then it's going to feel like less of a deal, and it's going to calm everyone down. So this is very, very important. Right, so now we are diverting. We have a plan in force. We have communicated to everyone. Now remember the acronym PIOSI. At the end of PIOSI, there's an evaluate part. And that evaluate part includes constantly thinking, are we doing the right thing? Not second guessing ourselves, but checking, for example, we had one problem. Maybe that problem has caused something else. Maybe there is more than an engine failure. Maybe there was contamination in the fuel and we're actually looking at problems with the remaining engine. Well, then it's a completely new ball game. Or maybe the weather is getting worse in Lisbon. Maybe it's not the best or most suitable airport anymore. So we're constantly evaluating. And if we find something in our evaluation that says, well, actually now this is not good anymore, well, then we start the PIOSI process all over again. And this is how we deal with problems like this. You have to have a good structure, great CRM, discussions, communication between the cabin crew members, not only between you and the first officer, but also to the cabin crew, to the passengers, or to air traffic control. Now, I'm not going to get into how we actually fly a single engine ILS approach. It's fascinating, but that's going to come in a different podcast. But I did this video because I got feedback from you guys that you didn't really get all of the information you wanted from my previous video. And this is what I do. I listen to the comments that you guys put into both onto the videos and also inside of the Mentour Aviation app. So I got a lot of messages there like, Mentor, can you please explain a little bit more about this and a little bit more about that? So please continue to do so. I love reading your comments and I love talking to you inside of the app chat as well. Remember, the app is completely free to download. You have the links down here. We have a great community with more than 15,000 active members every month inside of the app. Get in there, check it out, it's completely free. And if you want to see some of these things that I've been talking about, evacuations, TCAS, Cat 3 approaches, setup, engine failures, then you get one of the collections as well, and you get it in glorious 360 format where you can swipe around and you can see everything that's going inside of the cockpit, or you can move the mobile phone, or you can get a Google Cardboard headset and you can feel like you're just part of the crew sitting on the jump seat together with me while I'm doing all of these things. Make sure that you've subscribed to the channel, guys. Make sure that you have highlighted the notification bell so you know when I'm sending out these bonus episodes. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.